What if I told you that one of the greatest leaders in history was buried by God Himself in a location so secret that no one has found it to this day? That's right. Moses, the man who led millions out of Egypt, performed jaw-dropping miracles and saw God face to face, vanished from the scene without a trace. His body wasn't lost accidentally. It was intentionally hidden by God. Why? Was it to prevent idolatry, or does this mysterious act conceal a deeper meaning, one that still challenges how we understand obedience, leadership, and legacy? The story of Moses isn't just ancient history. Instead, it reflects our own lives today. Like him, we all face moments when the things we've worked so hard for remain just out of reach. How do we handle disappointment when we don't cross into our promised land? Moreover, what can we learn from the burial dispute between an archangel and Satan, a spiritual battle hidden in plain sight? These questions hold the key to understanding why Moses' story continues to resonate deeply, offering lessons that are still relevant. Are you ready to uncover this mystery and discover what it means for you? Moses stands out in history as the leader of the Exodus, the greatest escape ever recorded. He led millions of Israelites out of Egypt, breaking the chains of slavery through a series of miracles that defied logic. Imagine escaping from one of the most powerful empires of that time. It wasn't just luck. It was divine intervention every step of the way. From devastating plagues to the parting of the Red Sea, Moses witnessed the impossible. Yet these miracles weren't mere displays of power. Each revealed God's authority and taught the Israelites that faith always triumphs, even in the darkest circumstances. From the very beginning, Moses' life seemed destined for failure. Pharaoh had decreed the death of all Hebrew boys, but divine providence intervened. Rescued from the Nile by an Egyptian princess, Moses was raised as a prince, groomed for greatness, and given the finest education in Pharaoh's palace. It's fascinating to think that the same Moses, once a member of Egypt's royal court, would later lead the liberation of the very people Egypt tried to destroy. His story serves as a powerful reminder that God often uses the unlikely to accomplish the extraordinary. Moses' journey is also a testament to the importance of preparation. For 40 years, he lived as a shepherd in the wilderness, refining his character for the mission that awaited him. His story reflects that before great breakthroughs, there are often seasons of silence and personal growth. Perhaps the desert you're walking through now isn't punishment but preparation. And just as Moses was shaped by his time in the wilderness, so too, the next stage of his life was about to unfold, a stage that would demand faith, patience, and unwavering trust in God's plan. Moses' life took a dramatic turn when he encountered the burning bush in the wilderness. The bush was aflame, but not consumed, a sign that demanded attention. In this sacred moment, God called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Yet, Moses didn't respond with excitement. Instead, he gave excuse after excuse, expressing feelings of unworthiness, lack of eloquence, and doubt in his ability to convince others. How relatable is that? We all face moments when we question whether we are qualified for what life demands of us. But just as God reassured Moses by sending Aaron to assist him, he often equips us with what we need along the way. This encounter wasn't just a command. It was a profound lesson in trust and obedience. God didn't choose Moses for his abilities. He chose him because of his willingness to follow. The act of removing his sandals on holy ground symbolized reverence, teaching that divine encounters require humility. The burning bush reminds us that God's fire can burn within us without consuming us, just as His grace sustains us through life's trials. Even when we feel inadequate, as Moses did, God's power shines brightest in our weakness. This foundational moment prepared Moses for what lay ahead. Confronting Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler of his time, and demanding freedom for the Israelites. With sandals off and heart open, Moses stepped into his mission, fully aware that the journey would test his faith and courage. And so, the next chapter of his life began, with miracles that would not only shake Egypt but also transform Moses himself. When Moses returned to Egypt, armed with God's command and accompanied by Aaron, he faced immense opposition from Pharaoh. The confrontation wasn't straightforward. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, making it seem impossible to break the chains of oppression. But this is where God's miracles began to unfold, one after another. From turning the Nile into blood to releasing frogs, locusts, and darkness upon Egypt, each plague demonstrated God's supremacy over Egypt's gods. These weren't just random acts of power, they were divine messages, showing that God reigns over every nation and circumstance. As Moses stood before Pharaoh, each miracle not only displayed God's might, but also tested Moses' faith. Imagine how difficult it must have been to persist through Pharaoh's repeated refusals, knowing that every failure put lives at risk. Yet Moses continued to trust God, pressing on through every obstacle. The plagues culminated in the death of Egypt's firstborns, forcing Pharaoh to release the Israelites. This final act reinforced the truth that God's promises never fail, no matter how long or difficult the journey seems. Even when life feels like an endless confrontation, persistence and faith opens the door to freedom. With Pharaoh's grip finally broken, the Israelites were free to leave Egypt, marking the beginning of their journey to the Promised Land. However, freedom brought new challenges. The wilderness awaited them, a place where faith would be tested in ways they had never imagined. Though Moses had witnessed God's hand in miracles and deliverance, leading a nation through the desert would demand not just miracles but deep wisdom, trust, and patience. What lessons would the wilderness reveal? Moses' journey wasn't a solo mission. His siblings, Aaron and Miriam, played essential roles along the way. Aaron acted as Moses' spokesperson, bridging the gap when Moses doubted his speaking abilities, while Miriam led the Israelites in worship after the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea. Her joyful song reminds us that celebrating God's deliverance strengthens our faith in times of uncertainty. This partnership shows that even the greatest leaders need others by their side. No one achieves a vision alone. Who are the Aarons and Miriams in your life helping you stay on the path God has set before you? The bond between Moses, Aaron, and Miriam highlights the importance of shared leadership and responsibility. Aaron's role exemplifies the wisdom of delegating tasks, while Miriam's praise demonstrates how worship keeps us grounded during transitions. Even when Moses struggled with his speech, Aaron stepped up, reminding us that God places people around us to support us in moments of weakness. In your life, leaning on trusted allies, whether by asking for help or sharing burdens, isn't a sign of failure. It's an act of wisdom and humility. Of course, their relationship was not without challenges. At one point, Miriam and Aaron questioned Moses' leadership, resulting in Miriam being struck with leprosy. Yet, Moses interceded for her healing, demonstrating that forgiveness and restoration are key to maintaining meaningful partnerships. Their story reminds us that even in times of conflict, humility and prayer can rebuild trust. Just as Moses needed Aaron and Miriam to fulfill his mission, we too are called to support others and seek reconciliation when necessary. The road ahead is always clearer when traveled together. The wilderness journey was anything but easy. It tested the faith of Moses and the Israelites in every way imaginable. Hunger, thirst, and frustration became constant companions, and the people's complaints never seemed to cease. Yet, God continued to provide, sending manna from heaven and causing water to flow from rocks. But human impatience often overwhelmed their faith. At Meribah Kadesh, this tension came to a head. The people demanded water, and though God instructed Moses to speak to the rock, Moses, in his frustration, struck it instead, a costly act of disobedience. This incident at Meribah wasn't just about quenching thirst, it carried profound spiritual significance. The rock Moses struck symbolized Christ, who was meant to be struck only once, just as Jesus was sacrificed once for all. By striking the rock again instead of speaking to it, Moses distorted this imagery and failed to demonstrate God's holiness to the people. His disobedience serves as a powerful reminder that even leaders are held accountable to God's commands, and small acts of disobedience can have far-reaching consequences. The aftermath of Meribah was severe. God informed Moses and Aaron that they would not enter the Promised Land because they failed to uphold His holiness. It may seem like a harsh punishment, but it emphasizes the weight of spiritual leadership. Even under pressure, our actions carry significance, and we are called to honor God in all things. Though the wilderness was a place of provision, it was also a place of pruning, shaping Moses for the next chapter in God's plan. As the Promised Land came into view, Moses faced the reality that his journey would end on Mount Nebo. As the Israelites neared the Promised Land, God instructed Moses to ascend Mount Nebo, where he would see the land he had spent 40 years leading the people toward. From the summit, Moses gazed upon the vast beauty of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey. However, because of his disobedience at Meribah, he would not enter it. Imagine standing so close to a dream you've pursued for decades, only to know it will never be yours. Moses' view from Mount Nebo was a bittersweet reminder that some promises are fulfilled beyond our lifetime. Even though Moses would not enter Canaan, his role in God's plan was still crucial. On that mountaintop, God revealed the full scope of Israel's future, showing Moses the land of Judah, Ephraim, and Manasseh stretching out before him. This glimpse wasn't just geographical, it was a symbol of the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses' journey ended there, but his faith ensured that the next generation would step into the promise. Sometimes, like Moses, we labor for a dream that others will live, and that, too, is part of God's plan. Moses quietly passed away on Mount Nebo, and God himself buried him in a place no one would ever find. The secrecy of his burial serves as a safeguard against idolatry, as the Israelites had a tendency to worship symbols rather than God. Yet, it also reflects the deep reverence with which God honored Moses, his faithful servant. Though Moses' earthly journey ended on that mountaintop, his story didn't stop there. Centuries later, he would reappear in a moment that would change everything: the transfiguration of Christ. The Transfiguration offers a profound glimpse into the continuity of God's plan. On a high mountain, Moses stood alongside Elijah and Jesus, symbolizing the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Though Moses never entered the Promised Land during his lifetime, he stepped into God's eternal promise through Christ. This moment reveals that our journey with God isn't confined to earthly accomplishments. It extends into eternity. Moses' presence at the Transfiguration teaches us that salvation comes not through the law, but through faith in Jesus. Peter, witnessing this incredible event, wanted to build shelters for Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, but God interrupted with a clear message: "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." This moment underscores that while the law was important, it pointed toward something greater: Jesus, the fulfillment of every promise. The Transfiguration reminds us that salvation lies not in striving under the law, but in surrendering to Christ's grace. The story of Moses' burial takes an intriguing turn in the book of Jude, where the archangel Michael contended with Satan over Moses' body. This mysterious encounter leaves many questions unanswered. Why was Satan interested in Moses' body? And why did Michael refrain from confronting him directly, simply saying, "The Lord rebuke you"? This narrative isn't just a strange footnote. It offers profound lessons about spiritual warfare and the importance of relying on God's authority rather than our own strength when facing evil. Satan's claim over Moses likely stemmed from his role as the accuser, using Moses' past sins, such as killing an Egyptian, as justification for ownership. However, Michael's refusal to engage with Satan directly teaches us that in spiritual warfare, victory comes not from debating the enemy but from invoking the power and authority of God. This story emphasizes that when confronted with darkness, we must stand firm in God's promises, resisting the temptation to rely on human strength. Spiritual warfare is real, but it is God who ultimately prevails. The secrecy surrounding Moses' burial also serves a significant purpose. It prevented the Israelites from turning his grave into a place of worship. Throughout their history, the Israelites struggled with idolatry, often worshiping objects or symbols instead of focusing on God. By concealing Moses' burial site, God ensured that the people would direct their devotion toward him alone. This story reminds us that even the greatest leaders must pass the torch, and no human figure should ever become the object of worship. Moses' burial marks a transition, pointing us toward a greater leader who would bring ultimate salvation. The transition from Moses to Jesus represents a profound shift in God's redemptive plan. While Moses embodied the law, showing humanity the need for righteousness, it is Jesus who fulfills that need through grace and salvation. Moses could only bring the Israelites to the edge of the Promised Land, but it was Joshua, whose Hebrew name, Yeshua, parallels Jesus, who led them into it. This typology reflects the deeper truth that while the law guides us, it cannot save us. Only Christ, the true Yeshua, can lead us into God's eternal promise. The Promised Land. Moses, glimpsed from Mount Nebo, symbolizes the salvation that Jesus offers to all who believe. Just as the Israelites couldn't enter Canaan by their own strength, we cannot attain salvation through works or adherence to the law. Jesus, like Joshua, leads us into a new covenant where faith replaces effort as the path to righteousness. This teaches us that the wilderness seasons in our lives, like those Moses endured, are not wasted. They prepare us to trust not in ourselves, but in the finished work of Christ. Moses' story ends with a view of the land he longed for, but it also points beyond itself to the ultimate fulfillment found in Jesus. Through Christ, the limitations of the law are overcome, and salvation is offered freely to all who place their trust in him. Moses' life reminds us that even the greatest leaders have limits and that true freedom comes not from human achievement but from resting in God's grace. Now, the question remains: how will we respond to this gift of salvation? Will we continue striving under the weight of the law, or will we embrace the freedom Jesus provides? Moses' life is a masterclass in trust, obedience, and perseverance. From his miraculous survival as a baby to leading the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses teaches us that faith requires both action and surrender. Yet, even Moses faltered at Meribah Kadesh, showing that no one is immune to frustration or failure. His disobedience cost him entry into the Promised Land, but his journey didn't lose its significance. This is a lesson for all of us. Obedience matters, but God's purposes don't end with our mistakes. Even when we fall short, God's grace carries the story forward. The legacy Moses leaves behind reminds us that leadership isn't about perfection, but about perseverance. For 40 years, he guided a stubborn and fearful people through the wilderness, learning along the way that God's timing is not always ours. It's not just about reaching the destination, it's about growing through the journey. Whether you're leading a family, a business, or a personal transformation, Moses' story teaches us to stay the course, even when the path is difficult. Leadership comes with burdens, but also with the privilege of seeing God work through our lives in ways we could never imagine. Moses' final lesson lies in how he passed the torch to Joshua. Standing on Mount Nebo, he saw the Promised Land and knew that Joshua would complete what he started. This act teaches us that our impact often extends beyond what we witness in our lifetime. Just as Moses laid the groundwork for Joshua to succeed, we are called to build legacies that others can carry forward. Life is a relay, not a sprint, and true success lies in passing on wisdom, faith, and hope to those who come after us. What seeds are you planting today that will bear fruit for future generations? Moses' journey offers timeless lessons that shape how we live today. His struggles with trust and obedience remind us that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about taking the next step, even when the outcome is uncertain. Like Moses before the burning bush, we often feel unworthy or unequipped for the tasks in front of us. But just as God provided Aaron to assist Moses, help often arrives when we need it most. In our lives, this might mean trusting others for support or seeking mentors when the path ahead feels overwhelming. The wilderness experience also teaches us that delays are not denials. We all encounter seasons of waiting, whether for career breakthroughs, healing, or restored relationships. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading his people, showing that times of isolation often serve as preparation. Instead of resisting these seasons, we can embrace them as opportunities to grow. Use these moments to develop new skills, deepen your relationship with God, or invest in those around you. Every wilderness has an end point, and the Promised Land always lies ahead. Moses' life demonstrates that true legacy isn't built in comfort, but through perseverance and faith. Whether you're leading a family, a team, or a community, the goal isn't to do everything perfectly. It's to remain faithful to the mission. Like Moses passing leadership to Joshua, we too must recognize when it's time to empower others. Who are the people you are mentoring or investing in? What wisdom are you passing on? Moses' story urges us to live with intention, knowing that the ultimate reward lies not in personal achievements but in the impact we leave on those who follow. Are you ready to act, trusting that the seeds you plant today will bear fruit in ways you may never see? So, what will you do with all the wisdom hidden in the story of Moses? His life wasn't just about miracles and leading a nation. It was about trust, obedience, perseverance, and learning that some victories happen beyond our lifetime. Moses teaches us that even when we fall short, God's plan is still unfolding, and we have a part to play. Are you ready to embrace the wilderness moments in your life, trusting that they are shaping you for something greater? Like Moses passing the torch to Joshua, maybe it's time to think about your legacy. Who are you mentoring? What wisdom are you leaving for those who follow? The greatest impact often lies not in what we achieve, but in the seeds we plant for future generations. How would your life change if you started focusing not just on personal success, but on building others up along the way? If Moses could speak to us today, he'd remind us that even in failure, there is grace, and the true victory lies in surrendering to God's plan. Are you ready to step forward, trusting that the same God who called Moses is calling you too? Don't keep this knowledge to yourself. Subscribe to our channel, activate notifications, and join a community committed to learning from the greatest stories ever told. Your journey starts now. What will you do next?